Here's one of my essays that appeared in the Inroads magazine, Journal of the Soul, in 1992. Drinking at the Well of Instinct, The Way of the Hunter. And here's an epigraph. Kabir's instinct told him it was inside and what it was worth. That's a version by Robert Bly from Kabir number 33. In the essay, a hunter goes to a wild place where innumerable natural occurrences, deep red briars, windy knives, the long, knowledgeable bear's snout, a jay's claw-voiced alarm, contest his search for sustenance. Then he kills a living part of that place, returns to his home and people with food, and they eat. In the most simple of explanations, this is hunting. In its simplicity exists a deep mystery, for everything reacts to the whole of death he creates. In the world we live in, we do not need to hunt for sustenance, yet millions of people hunt. Hunting is important and vital for human beings. Despite the growing urbanization of the population, in the United States of America alone, in 1990, 21 out of every 100 men are licensed hunters, as are 2 of every 100 women. If those licensed to fish are included, and fishing is hunting in a watery environment, the percentages are even higher. In February 1992, a conveyor sprocket mangled the hand of a 13-year-old Arkansas boy while he was feeding chickens on the family farm. While racing to the hospital, his father kept the boy's mind off the injuries by reminiscing on the hunting and fishing trips the two had taken. After reconstructing his hand, the boy, in satisfactory condition, talked of resuming his favorite pastimes of hunting and fishing. In the winter of 1991-1992, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune newspaper asked school students to record their happiest moments in life. And among the more common responses from boys was a particular hunt with a father. Yet culturally, we know very little about why hunting is so important to so many people. The metaphor of the hunt is used in nearly every endeavor of work. To hunt for a lost child, to hunt for the cure for AIDS, to hunt for the proper mathematical formula, to hunt the libraries for obscure reference texts, to hunt for morel mushrooms in May, and on, always in a serious vein, always connected to active work. How facile we, the verbal dilettantes, are, as we use the imagery of the hunt, and how wonderful we feel when we find what we hunt. Then again, in this culture, the true powers of the archetypal hunter are misunderstood. Many people despise the hunt because of this cultural misunderstanding and ignorance in both the exterminator, who calls himself a hunter, and the non-hunter, who recognizes only the exterminator. We have been given a diminished understanding of the archetypal hunter and his forces because so few directly experience the hunt in its most instinctual way, and even fewer contemplate the complexity of the hunt. The city, a man-made world, separates people from the natural world, and for the past 150 years, the industrial lifestyle, which is another layer of urban culture, has formed above the original hunter-gatherer culture and the subsequent agricultural ways. With the onslaught of the electronic media and the computer age in the last 25 years, a thickening barrier of wires, chips, and electronic beams has created such psychological tangles and thorns that we have lost the knowing in every sense, and with every sense, all for the sake of our flawed designs. Although an anti-hunter movement continues to thrive and grow as the natural ecosystems diminish, their sentiment is hardly a recent phenomenon. In his 1599 play, As You Like It, Shakespeare created the melancholic Jaques, who bemoans the death of a deer killed for food. The Elizabethan audience would surely recognize the emotional concerns of the anti-hunters today. When I first read the tale collected by the Grimm brothers, the tale Brother and Sister, I saw the behavior of the sister as typical of many fear-laden, self-interested anti-hunters. On the other hand, I felt a deep affinity for the brother because, for a while, I lost the desire to hunt. But I participated vicariously with a voyeuristic eye and camera while hanging out at hunting camps for the camaraderie. I have since taken up the hunting chase again with a deeper respect for the hunter in us all. After studying the Grimm's story, I believe it is the best story in their collection to help us understand the deep archetypal energy and the role of the archetypal hunter. The story also opens us to the drama between hunter and anti-hunter. To quickly retell the story. A brother and sister run away from their wicked stepmother. Any father is conspicuously absent and not mentioned. They flee into the wild forest, which has been enchanted by the mother, who is a witch. The brother gets thirsty, but the sister knows that the springs are cursed, and to drink from them the brother would turn into a tiger, or a wolf, or a deer. She convinces the boy not to drink from the first two, for she is afraid of the predator's energy. But she is too late on the third spring, and the boy is transformed into a fawn. The sister then takes the fawn deeper into the forest to care for him. One day the king is hunting, and when the fawn hears the hunter's horns, his exhilaration demands of him to go out and participate, even if he must be the prey. For 3 days he goes out and returns in the evening. On the third evening, the king follows him to the hut. Upon seeing the sister, the king immediately asks her to be his queen. She will only do so if the fawn is cared for in the castle garden. Later, as queen, she gives birth to a son, while the king is out hunting again. The wicked stepmother, finding that the boy and girl did not die, disguises herself and becomes the queen's chambermaid. With help of her one-eyed daughter, the witch locks the queen in a hot bath and kills her, then places her daughter in the queen's place. The king is unaware of the switch until the baby's nurse finally reports that the ghost of the queen returns to suckle the child and pet the fawn each midnight. When the king sees her and calls to her and begins to participate as a father, she is brought back to life. The witch and the one-eyed daughter are killed, and the fawn regains human form. I cannot fully work with the story here, but with it as a text, I want to approach the mystery of the hunt, and I want to examine the role the hunter plays in an individual's life and culture. Few in Western traditions have approached the mystery of the hunt as a means to study the condition of the human soul. Bruno Bettelheim, the psychologist for children, interpreted the story as an instruction for, quote, getting out in the world on your own for the first time, unquote. He says that the thirst of the boy is symbolic of instinctual urges. As he thirsts, he thwarts those urges at his sister's suggestion. Would the boy tear his sister to pieces if he had transformed into a tiger? In this story, we do not know. By not following his instincts soon enough, the boy becomes the prey rather than the predator. His destiny is different, for he thought of his sister and not himself. We could also speculate that his sister, despite her concern for herself, may know intuitively that he is not yet capable of dealing with his instinctual forces. This brings to mind the plight of young boys today who never learn how to deal with their instincts. Chaotic and impersonal schooling, techno-pleasures, and the heady media influences thwart any practice of those psychic muscles which would help boys to learn how to deal with their instincts. Even the exterminator is the one who has not learned to recognize and handle the instinctual forces that arise out of the hunt. The exterminator loves the adrenaline rush, the addictive chemical and rationalist force from his head, rather than the instinctual force from the fuller body. After the brother becomes a fawn in the story, the sister collars him with her garter and leads him deeper into the forest by a leash. In the forest hut, his back is her pillow, and the story says, quote, if he only had his human shape, it would have been a glorious life, unquote. The sexual connotations are clear, and as with so many teenage boys, this one is not ready for interpersonal sexual behavior. He needs to hunt and learn about his instinctual forces. His sister uses her fears to keep him diminished. He pays more attention to her needs than to his own instincts. The Sufi poet Jalaluddin Rumi suggests just the opposite in this poem. Think that you're gliding out from the face of a cliff, like an eagle. Think you're walking like a tiger walks, by himself in the forest. You are most handsome when you are hunting for food. Spend less time with nightingales and peacocks. One is just a voice, the other just a color. Rumi tells us that the one who hunts directly experiences the vital forces throbbing through the instinctual body. Those forces make one, quote, most handsome, unquote. If we must actively imagine the first, as he suggests, we will eventually live the experience. The food, both the inner energy and the physical prey, will manifest when one is less distracted by the trappings of fanciful dimensions. The Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset, in his essay Meditations on Hunting, published in 1942, was one of the first and one of the very few to try and examine the hunt and the hunter in a thoughtful way. He understood that the urge to hunt comes from a mysterious and ultimately unconquerable source, just as philosophical ideas do. Although the work remains in a philosophical mode and holds to his belief that humans are superior to animals because of their reasoning capabilities, it can be read as appropriate without such condescension. The keystone to Ortega y Gasset's general philosophy is in the phrase, quote, yo soy yo y mis circunstancias, unquote. I am I and my surroundings. Here is a philosophy of connectedness between the self and the non-self, or the other. And it follows that with such a basis for his philosophy, he would eventually meditate upon the hunt. In an essay of delightfully quotable quotes, Ortega y Gasset writes, quote, the hunt really is a contest or confrontation between two systems of instincts functioning freely, unquote. If the hunting instincts function freely, and if one has the instincts of a predator, the predator must act as a predator. This truthful, instinctual functioning is what frightens the sister in the Grimm's tale. Tom Brown Jr., the tracker, says, quote, within us there is a primitive self, a self that could be called upon for insight or for power in a time of need. This is a basic self that all beings carry within, a primal self closest in kind to the spirit that moves in all things, unquote. He goes on to describe that one of the first things he had to learn about this primal self was, quote, the necessity of releasing the animal, the more instinctual self within. This is the ancient part of our being, and it is through the animals that we are connected to our distant ancestors, unquote. This instinctual self is a difficult power to control, and at certain times the primal animal knows what to do better than the logical mind knows, for the mind disappears and the instincts take over. However, he warns, quote, it can be a hideous beast unless controlled, and it is dangerous for modern man to use this instinct without proper training, unquote. The metaphorical, archetypal hunter controls this instinctual power. With much the same tone, Bettelheim says, quote, in terms of the fairy story, hunting is not to be understood as an unnecessary killing of animals. Rather, it symbolizes a life close to and in accordance with nature, an existence in line with our primitive being. In many fairy stories, hunters are kind-hearted, helpful people, as in Little Red Riding Hood. The hunter is not an exterminator, for the hunter has many lessons to teach us about living appropriately in the natural world. And extermination is contrary to those lessons. For instance, even the most organized and least instinctual of hunting groups consider themselves conservationists and work toward environmental causes. The hunter afield is often the first to notice environmental changes in habitats and ecosystems. In the same way, organized environmentalists, most of whom are relative newcomers to the wild world, compared to organized hunters, they will move toward the understanding that there is a need for hunting, for the animal's sake and humans' sake. Take a look at the lethargic and buttery Canadian geese thriving in northern cities. They seem to have lost as much inner fire as the pastel-draped men who throw them bread crusts from plastic bags. The closer one gets to nature, the more instinctual one begins to behave, and eventually this leads to an appropriate hunt. When done properly, as Brown reports, quote, We have to take lives of things, whether it be plant or animal, for our survival. By taking things the right way, as caretakers, we could begin to undo the damage that has been done. We are not to play God, but rather follow the natural order of things. In this way, living the natural way, our impact would have positive effects on all things of the earth." Unquote. Many anti-hunters want to give animals human rights, and thus, through implication, give themselves the rights of gods. Many hunter-gatherer peoples had the reversed mindset toward animals. At times, they considered the animals to be the gods. They studied them, they knew them intimately, and they revered them. They also hunted animals. Ortega y Gasset said that there are 4 things men do to make themselves happy when they are able. They hunt, they dance, they race, and they discourse. He goes on to point out that the primitive man spent almost all of his time doing one or another of these things. In the hunt, there is an exhilaration, and in our story, when, quote, "it so happened that the king of the country held a great hunt. The forest rang with the sound of horns, the barking of dogs, and the joyous cries of the hunters. The fawn heard the sounds of the hunt and longed to join in." Unquote. On each of the 3 days, the fawn has to beg his sister to let him out, for the powerful need to joyfully participate increases inside. The first day he says, "Let me go. I can't bear it any longer." On the second day, his exclamation is, "Open the door, sister. I shall die if I don't go." By the third day, he says, "When I hear the hunting horn, my heart is ready to burst. I can't keep still. If I don't go, I will die of misery right here." Unquote. And each day the sister relents and opens the door, allowing the animal in her brother to participate in the great hunt. On the second day, the fawn is slightly wounded in the foot, and though he hardly notices, the sister aches with dismay and cleans the wound with herbs and water. As the attentive healer, she takes on the pain the fawn ignores. This is an important point of difference between the brother and sister. And although her need to heal and protect is being superseded by instinctual passion, she is following her heart. We have a conflict of interests, yet both are following their hearts. On the third day, the king tells his hunters to chase the fawn, but not to harm it, for he has noticed that it is a special deer. He is led to the hut where he sees the sister, and immediately the king asks her to be his wife. Amazing. Because the king went hunting with joyful, lusty, and conscientious hunters, because the fawn followed his heart's passion, and because the sisters acted according to her heart, the king met his queen. This alone would be a great finale to a story. However, there is more to this story. For now, I want to look at the joyfulness of the hunt. Here's a short passage from the Odyssey. "When the young dawn spread in the eastern sky, her fingertips of rose, the men and dogs went hunting, taking Odysseus." Ortega y Gasset wrote about the moment of the hunt. Quote, "Without his meaning to, the hunter's soul leaps out, spreads out over the hunting ground like a net, anchored here and there with the fingernails of his attention. This is the moment of complete attention, body, mind, instinct, and soul. It comes after much difficulty and discipline, for hunting is not done for pleasure, but for joy, and these are two different emotions. Pleasure is a passive occurrence, and in all joy there is pleasure. Yet, to feel joy, one must energetically act, usually with much discipline and difficulty. In hunting, the happiness occurs, not as so many understand in the pleasure of the kill. The kill is a sorrowful and instinctual necessity to a long-planned, hard-earned chore, filled with the annoyances and sufferings of many kinds. It is the completion of a natural task, and only in this completion is the joy real. There are true feelings so many of us remember all our lives. I remember the first time I was allowed to hunt rabbits with my father and uncle. Until then, I had accompanied them as a brush jumper and a retriever in the winter snow. The first time I was old enough to handle a gun, my godfather, my uncle, played the role of a brush jumper for me. As he bounced atop a brush pile, a cottontail rabbit fled its hideaway, then leapt across the snow from my left to my right. I shot and killed it. The combination of horror, pride, and exhilaration mingled through me and fused into a feeling which I can only describe as happiness, yet a happiness with a deeper connection. With that hunt, a bit of naivete shed from my soul. This purposeful and successful bagging of several rabbits on a bright, wintry Sunday afternoon fed our family several meals. I was part of the natural flow of things in a way I only began to slightly understand. The emotions within me altered me. These mingling emotions fused into new emotions and new realities which would carry me to another level of feeling at a later time. I have not regretted my hunting, or the gifts of meat, feathers, and fur I received from the animals. Reminders are with me today. I keep a raccoon skin, which I have used for a men's dance. Staring meditatively from atop my bookshelf is the skull of a deer with its hollowed eye sockets. These animal pieces keep me aware of the nearness of death and the preciousness of the flow of life and the natural laws governing us all. The hunter takes a life consciously so he can live and, therefore, participates intimately with the mystery of mortality. It's as if when he kills an animal, he pulls an opening in the veil between life and death. If he is not defending himself with delusions of hierarchical dominance, or the opaque barriers of repressed fear, or an addictive obsession with death, the hunter is directly connected to the great mystery until the veil closes again. The vacuum of death pulls at his soul for a few moments. Because the hunter knows that the food killed must be replenished, he is careful not to abuse the hunt. He monitors the natural balances on his hunting grounds to ensure the continuation of that balance, which allows the natural world to function at its optimal capacity. The archetypal hunter is not a steward, nor a spectator. The concept of stewardship, even in its best context, means a beneficent dominance by humankind. Therefore, a psychological separateness from the natural world. One who is merely a spectator in the natural world is separate from that world. A theory held by some scholars, and it feels correct to me, is that The Paleolithic hunter-gatherers lived with the most balanced consciousness of any Western European people because they did not experience the split between themselves and the rest of the universe. The ego did not play the dominant role in their consciousness, but participated in a balanced role with the other conscious functions. Therefore, the individual could acknowledge the polarity of self-otherness and not hold fears, expressed or repressed, of the outer or inner worlds. The teachings from Native Americans, who have not had a continuous 10,000 years of cityfied cultural barriers between themselves and the natural world, often discount the Christian belief in original sin. And they say that their people try to hold on to the connectedness and polarity rather than the separateness and dichotomy. The Lakota peoples have the philosophy of mythopoetic oyasin, or all my relations, to express that all things are related and connected in this world. Ortega y Gasset approached this with his Yo soy yo y mis circunstancias. This is also the base of the greening consciousness in the global environmental movement. William Stafford wrote a wonderful short poem about hunters titled People with Whetstones. Hard-working hunters beyond the taiga sharpen their knives, get up early, watch carefully. They have a name for everyone else. People who talk about God. Feel the sting of Stafford's lance. As a writer who often writes about God, I feel doubly poked. The hunter with connectedness to the earth immediately knows that the experience with the great mystery is at the core of the hunt. As a man who hunts, I know at times I live as those hard-working hunters do, and I feel better for such living, for it is the experiential living which is important. They live the experiences with God. This experience is through connectedness and not separate from activity. The hunter is an active participant, not a passive participant. The so-called buffalo hunters could not experience this mystery. They were not hunters, they were exterminators. When they exterminated the great herds, an individual shooter could make almost as much money as a gold miner in the gold fields. This at the expense of the buffalo and the people dependent upon the buffalo herds. Killing of this sort creates the ultimate separation, that between the exterminator and everything else in the universe.